In this question we are given that Francine travelled X% of the total distance at an average speed of 40 miles per hour and the rest of the distance at an average speed of 60 miles per hour. So the first speed is 40 miles per hour and the second speed is 60 miles per hour. Now we are given that the total distance that he covered in the first part of the journey was X% of the total distance. Now since we don't have any variable here for the total distance, let's take the total distance to be equal to d. That means that the distance that he covers in the first part of the journey is equal to X% of d. Now we have to find in terms of x what was Francine's average speed for the entire trip. Now we know that the formula for average speed is equal to total distance by total time. Now that we have written down all the information that we can get from the question, let's move on to step 2 and understand how to solve the question. Now the time that Francine takes to cover the first part of the trip will be equal to the distance travelled divided by the speed. So the distance will be X% of d and the speed at which he travels in the first part of the trip is 40 miles per hour. This is equal to x by 100 times d divided by 40, which gives us xd by 40 times 100. Now this is the time that he takes for the first half of the trip. Similarly, when we find out the time to cover this for the second half of the trip, we first find out the difference. Now if he travels X% of the distance in the first part of the trip, then the distance that he travels in the second part of the trip. So the percentage of distance travelled in second half will be equal to 100 minus X% of d. Then if we denote the time taken by Francine to cover for the second half of the trip by t2, then t2 will be equal to 100 minus x by 100 times d divided by the speed, which is 60 miles per hour. This gives us 100 minus x times d divided by 60 times 100. Thus the total time will be equal to t1 plus t2. Now this is equal to xd divided by 40 times 100 plus 100 minus x times d divided by 60 times 100. On simplifying this, if I take 100 common, I have xd by 40 plus 100 minus x times d by 60. Now when I take the LCM, 120 in the denominator and the numerator becomes 3xd plus 200 times d minus 2xd. Now this gives us xd plus 200d divided by 120 times 100. Now this is the total time and we have the total distance, which is d. So the average speed will be equal to the total distance divided by the total time, which is xd plus 200 times d divided by 120 times 100. This is equal to d multiplied by 120 times 100. Now if we take d common, we have d times x plus 200. Now d gets cancelled and the value of average speed in terms of x is equal to 12000 divided by x plus 200, which is our option E.